Today we'll be covering Chapter 15, which is Understanding Research. This chapter is going to cover some of the things that you need to know regarding responsible research and what kind of articles and sources are appropriate for your research papers. So the quote for this chapter is, "Research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose," by Zora Neale Hurston. So you need to ask yourself a couple of questions here. The first question is, what does this quote mean? The second question is, what does Hurston mean above when she says research is poking and prying with a purpose? You need to be able to answer both of those questions. Now, with research, you want to ask yourself some basic questions. So one of these questions might be, what are the guidelines? So your research must follow guidelines and timelines established by your instructor. What is a guideline for the next assignment? So you want to make sure you write that down, and the next assignment will be your outline. What are some of the guidelines for the next assignment? Any key aspect of the research process, it needs to use outside sources of information. Why do you need to use outside sources of information? That's something that's worth discussing. Is it enough to just have your opinion? This chapter is going to help you write effective research reports. So again, effective research reports are essays or anything else that is backed up with research. So make sure you know what an effective research report is. So learning outcomes in this chapter, there are 5 of them. The first one is understanding sources of information. What are the 2 sources of information? The second one is evaluating sources of information. So what does it mean to evaluate information? The third one, citing sources of information. Fourth, avoiding plagiarism. What is plagiarism? And learning outcome 5 is reviewing responsible research. So learning outcome 1, understanding sources of information. Why or in what instance would you use primary sources? So what are primary sources? That's what you might ask yourself. A primary source provides information that you collect directly, such as firsthand experiences. So some examples of this are interviews and surveys. This is where you interview someone or you get responses from a survey. Observations, this is what someone actually sees. So if you are chronicling what you saw in terms of going to, let's just say you went to a Native American reservation and you were writing down what it is that you saw, what you witnessed, that is an observation. It is the primary source. Presentations such as art exhibits or museum displays, these are also primary sources. Gaining firsthand experience, so actually doing something, being immersed in something, that's a firsthand experience. Studying original documents such as court records, letters, etc. Why or how would a court record, how is that a good primary source? Be able to explain that. The next thing, you have secondary sources. That's the second source of information. Secondary sources provide information that you collect indirectly, such as through reading books and articles. So some examples of this are reference books such as encyclopedias, nonfiction books, that's another secondary source. Periodicals such as magazines and journals, that is a secondary source. Newspapers and websites. So if you remember during doing the library assignment, you did use only secondary sources. Now, reference books. What's an advantage of a reference book? Be able to list that. What's a disadvantage of a reference book? The next thing, you have nonfiction. So what's an advantage of a nonfiction book? What's a disadvantage of a nonfiction book? We can go back to reference books. Reference books, an advantage of them is that they are a good starting point for your research. So a reference book such as an encyclopedia, it gives you all the information that's general about a subject. Now the bad thing about it is that it gives general information. It doesn't give you any specifics. So an advantage is that it's a good starting point in case you need to know something. It's a good starting point, but at the same time, the disadvantage is that it gives you information that is entirely too general. Next thing, you have nonfiction books. An advantage of them is that they have more information than a reference book, so they're a little more specific. But the disadvantage is that they could be old and the author might not be recognized in their field of study. So that's a disadvantage of a nonfiction book. Another thing is that you also have periodicals, which are magazines and journals. For journals, you could say an advantage of that is that they are usually peer-reviewed. That means that other experts in the field have looked at the article that someone has published and said, okay, this article is worthy of being published, and the information that's being discussed in this article is credible information. So that's an advantage of a journal. A disadvantage of a journal is that sometimes, just like nonfiction books, they can be old. So that's a disadvantage. Another thing that you should be aware of is websites. So you have some things, so you have websites such as YouTube. So YouTube can be good because it can be a place to where you can get interactive information. So if you decide to look up something about global warming, you can look at documentaries on YouTube. You can look at different things that people have found regarding global warming on YouTube. Now, disadvantage of that is that you could end up looking for issues with global warming, and then by the time it's all said and done, you're now watching a cat flush a toilet. That's a disadvantage. It can be a distraction sometimes. So the next thing you have is the value of primary and secondary sources. So a primary source, its value is that it offers a direct, meaningful involvement in the research process. Again, a value of primary sources is that they offer a direct, meaningful involvement in the research process. There's meaningful involvement in that the person who's doing the research is actually involved in the process. So that's a value of primary sources. A value of secondary sources is that they enhance your understanding by providing expert explanations and analyses of a topic. So the value of secondary sources is that they give you expert analyses of a topic. The next thing to understand is that using secondary sources such as books, periodicals, magazines, and websites, you can look at those in that they are general sources of information. They are also available via print and also online. Nonfiction books, they are also a main source of information in college level research projects. So within your research projects, you are going to use nonfiction books and you will use reference books. Again, not only are these available in print, they are also available online. Periodicals, such as magazines and journals, they're published on a regular basis. They can be weekly, monthly, or they can be quarterly. So they are generally pretty updated because they have those timelines. But as I said previously, they can also be older. So if you have a journal from 1981, you might not want to use it unless they are discussing a theory or a phenomena that still holds true today. The general rule of thumb is that for journals, magazines, periodicals, things like that, is 10 years. So count back from the year that you are in. For example, this is 2014. So by your timeline should be from 2004 to 2014. You shouldn't use anything that's older than that. The next thing, you can find articles. So again, if you remember the library assignment, you can use EBSCOhost, you can use LexisNexis, you can use Google, Bing, all those things you can use also as reference points. Again, remember the difference between a credible and an uncredible site. Credible sites generally will end in .org, .gov, .edu. Those sites generally have nothing to gain from the information they're giving you. They're just reporting information. And then also remember, .com is not always bad. Some of them are because of the fact that it's just commercial. Anyone can put any information on them. But remember such websites as CNN.com, HuffingtonPost.com. Those are credible websites, although they are .com. And then also you want to remember that websites are not the only place to look. Look at reference books. If you cannot get the book at the library, you can use Google Books. It will not give you the full book, but it'll give you some of the book. So that's also another place that you can start. So the next thing is using keywords for your searching. A guide to using keywords, you want to start by typing your topic. The next thing you want to do, add a word to be more specific. So for example, if your general topic is college, that's going to give you a lot of hits. So you want to make sure you narrow it down. How would you narrow down the word college? If you were looking at something specific, what are keywords you can use to narrow down college? Give an example of this. You want to put the phrase in quotation marks to call up just the stuff that is in that phrase. So for example, if you're looking at college difficulty, you can put this in quotation marks. This is what it should look like. So you have quotation mark, and then college, difficulty, and then end quote. So that's what it would look like. It would look like college difficulty, quotation mark, the word, close quotation mark. That will help you call up only specific instances of the word college difficulty in that order. So the next thing you have words such as and, not, to narrow or focus your search. So you could do college difficulty and freshman. So that will give you information regarding college difficulty as it pertains to freshmen. You could put in college difficulty, not high school. That would exclude instances of the word high school. So learning outcome 2, evaluating sources of information. How do you know if something is reliable or if it's trustworthy? Be able to explain that. So you want to be sure that you use your sources. You want to be able to use sources that are reliable and trustworthy. You want to make sure that this person that's speaking on something or writing about something is an expert. Before interviewing an expert, learn about that person. Learn if it's just someone who's ranting about something or if this person is actually an expert in something. In books and other printed material, questions you would ask yourself is, does the author have the proper background? If someone is writing about neuroscience, is this person a neuroscientist? So these are questions that you would ask yourself. You want to check materials, the publisher's date of publication, as well as make sure that the information is correct and reputable. Another question, or another thing you want to do is decide if the information seems to be balanced and reasonable. This will help you to be able to gauge whether something is reliable or not. If it's balanced and unbiased, generally it could be. But if there's something that you're reading and it is completely biased, chances are it may not be credible. So you want to make sure you keep those things in your mind when you were trying to evaluate if something is a credible source. Telecast and broadcast, they may address a topic unfairly. Again, if you were looking at a telecast or a broadcast, their purpose is to attract a certain member of an audience. So they might be biased or they might speak unfairly. So you want to steer clear of those. Documentaries and straight news reports will be more reliable than certain talk radio conversations because a documentary or a news report, their only job is to report the news. Their only job is to communicate information. There is no opinion, there is no bias. All they are doing is reporting information as it is. So that's credible. For websites, you want to be sure that the author is reliable and respected in the field as well. Types of sites, you have government sites, which is .gov. You have education, which is .edu. And then you have nonprofit, which is .org, nonprofit organization .org. Be able to describe how, or be able to list these three as ways to tell if a website is credible or not. Those three will need to be included. These sites are usually more credible than .com. Again, a .com can be credible, but these three sites, .gov, .edu, .org, are generally more credible because they have nothing to gain from disseminating information. Learning outcome 3, citing sources of information. You must give credit to the source of ideas or words that you use in your academic essays and reports. Plagiarism is defined as using the words and thoughts of others without crediting them in your own writing. Plagiarism also includes resubmitting your assignments. That is also considered plagiarism because you have already received credit for it. There are different types of styles in academic writing. You have MLA, which is the Modern Language Association. You have APA, which is the Association of the American Psychological Association. There are different styles and they have different formatting. For example, MLA specifies one space after a period. APA specifies 2. MLA does not have a title page. MLA does not have a title page, but APA does. There's Chicago, there's Turabian, there's all kinds of different formatting styles. So for this class, what style are you going to use? Learning outcome 3 is creating a source list at the end of your paper. This is called a works cited, and you have to have this list so that your reader can locate any sources that you quote within your paper. So if you have citation, but you do not have a works cited page, this is incorrect. If you are going to have citation or in-text citation, your reader needs to know where to find this information. So any sources listed on the works cited page also must be listed within your paper. So it makes no sense to have 5 sources on your works cited page, but nothing referenced within the paper. You have to have, if it's cited within your paper, it should be on your works cited page and vice versa. Sources cited in your paper, again, they must also appear on the source list or your works cited page. So, What is it that you need to include on your works cited page? You need to, of course, have the author's name if there is an author. You need to have the title, depending on what the source is. You need to have publication facts, such as the date, the place of publication, the publisher, or the appropriate web information. I do not want URLs, so if you're using a website, delete URLs. Just have web, as well as the day that you accessed it and the day that it was published on the website. Learning outcome 4, avoiding plagiarism. You don't want to plagiarize because you will be referred for doing so. There are ways to avoid it. So, you have some different types of plagiarism. Be able to explain some types of plagiarism and what it means. A kind of plagiarism, copying text. What does that mean? Forgetting quotation marks. What does that mean? Restating ideas without citing them. That is also a type of plagiarism. Explain what that also means. This concludes Chapter 15, Understanding Research. Be prepared to discuss this in class.